So a few weeks back, I was walking into a grocery store, and I heard somebody say Larkin Rose, and I turned over to some guy never met, and I said, yeah. And it turned out to be a guy from, he's a Palestinian, but he's been living in Israel and going to a university there working on his, I don't know if it's a doctorate or something or other, getting a degree in something or other. And so he very briefly had an exchange there, enough for him to tell me that, and he'd seen my videos and stuff and liked them, and so I said thank you, and then I went inside. I was kind of in a hurry, so I only had a couple seconds, because I had to go inside and buy stuff, and then I forget what else I was supposed to do right after that. But I went in and I was buying stuff, and I thought, how often do I get to actually talk to somebody who is directly there and has lived it? So I decided, heck with it, if he's still there, I want to talk to him some more on the way out. And he was. And the thing is, that's how I get my impressions of what's actually going on in the world. It's still secondhand, it's still anecdotal, it's still imperfect, but it's way better than believing the media and what somebody with an agenda who owns these big, media corporations decides to tell me about, or how they decide to spin it. So whenever possible, I try to get my impression of what's going on in different places in the world by people who've actually been there. And if it's somebody I already know who's been there and reports it to me, and I know what their slant might be or how trustworthy they might be, that's even better. But at least talking to people who've been through it, who've lived through it, is way more reliable and way more likely to actually give you an impression of what's going on. And so I thought, I can't pass up this opportunity. Here's a Palestinian dude in his 20s. I don't even know if he told me his name, but if he did, I forget. But I came out, and he was still there on his phone, and so I sat down. We chatted for, must have been at least half an hour, because I wanted to get his take on what it's like to actually be over there. And there, for the degree of racism that still exists in the U.S., to differing degrees from differing people, I think the remnant of the worst racism here, as in against blacks, is from the police in different places, where there seems to just be an obvious agenda of overt violence. Because other than that, if it's just, those people talk bad about me, or they use slurs or something, okay, that's not nice. It's not ideal, but it's not as bad as getting murdered for your race. And over in Palestine and Israel and a bunch of places in the Middle East, there is all the way that level of violence. And Palestinians are all the way being murdered for being Palestinian. And they're all the way being forcibly evicted. And the thing is, I have no idea if this guy was religious at all. I didn't care. That never came up in discussion. He wasn't wearing anything that would indicate that. And given that I'm pretty sure he was an anarchist, the religion thing comes secondary, if at all. But this has nothing to do with Muslims versus Jews. It has to do with violent aggressors versus their victims. And the state of Israel is a giant terrorist violent aggressor that has a lot in common with the U.S. ruling class. Except over there, they can get away with a level of overt racist pack mentality and violence based on it that you can't get away with here anymore. The cops beat the hell out of black people, but they can't just say, it's because you're black, so we're all going to openly admit we're beating the crap out of you. Over in Israel, they do that. They will harass you and terrorize you for being Palestinian. And this guy told some stories about when he was, he would get beat up as a kid for being Palestinian. And he'd get harassed. He's over there. He has all the pieces of paper that says he's allowed to be there, but they just, the law enforcement over in Israel will routinely harass him and interrogate him. And do you have all this? Do you have all that? And treat him like crap because he's a Palestinian and for no other reason. And to sort of compare the level of complaints, because over there, the chances are pretty dang high that you will all the way be murdered by the ruling class of Israel for being Palestinian. Whether you're in Israel or right next door, or, in all the places they've been pushing them out. If you look at that map, if you've never seen it, look up the map. Again, this has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with political power. Look at the map of Israel. Look where Palestinians used to live and how it's just been taken over. They've just been forcibly evicted and terrorized and murdered on occasion. And it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And now it's like, these mean Palestinians are oppressing Israel by being on this like square inch that they're still allowed to be in. And it's a political thing. And the thing is, the ruling class of Israel loves to play the anti-Semitism card of, well, if you criticize us, you must hate Jews. I don't care if you're Jewish. I care if you're an authoritarian murdering psycho. And the people in charge of the ruling class in Israel absolutely are. As I've said a million times, I completely despise the state of Israel because it's a state. And it happens to be a terrorist state and a violent state. And I even talked to this guy about the fact that, you know, it's so ironic that they still play the card of, we're the victim of the Nazis, even though the Israeli government behaves in every way like Nazis. We show us your papers and we're going to beat you up because you're not the chosen people and this and that and the other people and this, that, and the other thing, and you don't belong here and we're just going to murder you. And they do it over and over again, and the UN says, that's bad, don't do that, and whoopee-doo, they do it anyway because they're a violent ruling class, which much the same mentality as the U.S. ruling class, except the U.S. ruling class, there isn't a group, the Orange Führer is trying pretty hard to make it so that Muslims and or illegal immigrants are more and more targets of violent aggression, but so far, yes, they still have to be a little bit sneaky about it. They can't just say, well, it's our official policy to just beat the crap out of you for being the wrong color or from the wrong, you know, you were born in the wrong place, so we're going to beat the crap out of you. It's getting worse, but still to talk to someone who grew up in that and saw that firsthand and sees it firsthand. He was just visiting the U.S. As far as I know, he may already be back there. But to hear it firsthand, what he's been through and what he's seen, it's very eye-opening, and it's creepy how much Americans believe the media based on, you know, well, the news says that Israel is being attacked by these horrible Palestinian terrorists and is defending itself like it's a thing, like there's just a thing called Israel and there's bad people attacking it. And of course, there are nasty, violent people who are Palestinians and there are nasty, violent people who are Israelis. The Israeli ruling class is an official, institutionalized organization of violence and murder and violent authoritarian domination. Like it isn't, there are plenty of individuals who may do nasty things in the other direction, but this is legalized murder and warmongering and all that evil crap. But to see somebody who just wants to be left alone, who's been through it and who lives through it and sees it day to day, it's fascinating to watch to get his perspective of what it's actually like. And this is from an anarchist. He's not like, we need a different ruling class in there. And he was commiserating with him about the fact that, you know, it's hard enough for me, total American-sounding, white, honky redneck, not really a redneck, but I might as well be, look like one, sound like one half the time. It's hard enough for me to explain that I want no ruling class. I don't think government's legitimate at all. To get a Palestinian with a Palestinian accent saying he opposes all government, most Americans are going to assume you must be a terrorist. And so he was sort of, he was talking about how it's hard for him to actually try to explain voluntarism because immediately people will jump to you're trying to overthrow and you blow things up. And because, I've seen myself, they jump to enough stupid conclusions when someone who looks like me says it. When someone who looks like him says it, like, good Lord, all the weird things they're going to assume that are totally off. But he's the guy's, doesn't want government of any kind forcibly dominating anybody, anywhere. So, but it's so, people's perspective when they, here's your daily life, here's what you actually see in real life, and then you turn on the TV and they tell you what's going on in the Middle East or in Africa or in here and there, wherever, or in Mexico or all over the place. And you sort of imagine that now you know what's going on because somebody gave you the tiniest slice which may have been total lies anyway, but the tiniest slice of what's going on there, instead of talking to people who actually live there and have to deal with it day in and day out. And there really are just totally race-based atrocities being committed, including murder, being committed on a regular basis by the state of Israel. And again, has nothing to do with religion. It's not about, Jews and Palestinians or Jews and Muslims or anything of the sort. Some sides can say, I'm doing this for my religion, blah, blah, blah. But the state, the ruling class, is just about power. It's like when the U.S. ruling class bombs people on the other side of the world, every once in a while you hear some doofus politician either hinting or saying that we're doing God's work over there, blowing up brown people. But for the most part, it's just, no, government, we can because we're big and strong, so we blow you up. And that's the mentality of the ruling class of Israel, is we can beat you up and chase you away, and we need someone to pretend to protect people from. So we're going to choose Palestinians, we're going to label you all as these nasty terrorists. And there's a bunch of Israelis who believe it and will commit violence against Palestinians on their own. Not legally, not as enforcers, but they are so indoctrinated into the groupthink that they will initiate violence on their own, which is also true of some Americans. The Americans are like, I'll go to the border and threaten to kill anybody who's slightly brown trying to come over. Evil bastards who've been so trained to hate an entire group, to fear and hate an entire group, that they will act as a violent extension of the state without even permission, without any authority or badge or law saying they're allowed to. But it's still just a divide and conquer. It's just the useful idiots being used by the politicians' agenda to forward the divide and conquer thing. And so I mostly focus on the U.S. ruling class and the evil stuff it does, because that's the ruling class of where I happen to live right now. It's not because it's the worst one in the world. Right now, it's the most powerful one in the world. It's the most powerful, authoritarian, evil, oppressing bastard in the world is the U.S. government. But there are plenty of places where the regimes are more openly brutal. They don't even pretend to care about due process, although neither does Donald Trump. But the government as a whole kind of sort of pretends, doesn't pretend very well. But there are places that are just overtly like, if there's anything we don't like about you, you just totally get murdered. And here they try to keep up the facade of due process and, rule of law and all that, yada, 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 which is a lie anyway, but at least they try to keep up the lie. But to hear from people who have lived in those other places and who've seen it on a daily basis and lived through it and been subjected to it, is just, it's very eye-opening, because if you're never on the receiving end, like I think for Whitey in the U.S. back when, slavery was ended, then you had forced segregation, then you had forced integration, like government could never just let people be free and do freedom of association. They had to force it one way and then force it another way. Always government violence and control. And for a bunch of whitey who back then who's thinking, well, I do as I'm told, and the police never give me any trouble. If the police are giving you trouble, Mr. Black Man, it must be because you're a horrible criminal. They never saw what people like Malcolm X saw up close and personal over and over again. No, this is a violent gang of malicious, sadistic psychos violently attacking us and sometimes killing us. And the thing is, what is still happening over in the Middle East is still that bad. There's still open murder going on. In fact, as far as I know, not that well versed on either one, but I'm pretty sure the body counts under the Israeli government murdering Palestinians is way higher than blacks murdered by the white cops in this country after slavery ended. But it's the same thing, and it's the same mentality, and it's the same evil. But people have this gross, it's like the cheering for a sports team. Well, Israel's on our side, right? They're our allies, right? So they must be the good guys, right? No, they're friggin' evil. But when people think in terms of teams, then they will go so far out of their way to not notice horrendously evil crap going on. I mean, the ultimate example of that was World War II, where at the beginning of it, you had Hitler and Stalin on the same side. They're both our horrible enemies. And then one day, never mind, Uncle Joe Stalin is now our buddy. He's now a swell guy. We're not going to mention that he's like ridiculous, insane mass murderer who's killed tens of millions of his own people. Yeah, we'll just sort of skip that for now. And then people believe. And they think, well, he must not be that bad because now he's on our side, rah, rah, rah. And they think in terms of sides instead of looking at individuals and saying, well, what are the individuals in this institution actually doing? What do the police and the military of Israel actually do? They terrorize and torture and murder people. That's what they frickin' actually do on a regular basis. And again, may not be every single individual, but it's a hell of a lot of them, and it is institutionalized violence. So if you're part of that gang, it's like if you're part of American law enforcement. Like if you see your fellow thugs beating people up and arresting people for victimless crimes and you sit there and do nothing, you're complacent. If you're not a collaborator, you're at least an enabler by sitting there and going, oh, well, I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm just going to go along and be part of this machine that commits violent aggression against people. And so some people complain, well, you group all cops together and you tell us not to group. No, you don't group by an accident of birth, where somebody was born or anything like that, or what color they are, because that doesn't give you responsibility. The group of people known as soldiers or law enforcers are a bunch of individuals, every single one of whom has voluntarily chosen to act as a violent thug for a ruling class, whether it's over here, Israel, or China, or anywhere else. They've chosen to act as thugs for the state. And so, yes, as a group, they are evil, because it's like saying, well, I don't want to generalize that all carjackers are bad. I do, because the word means people who steal people's car by force. Just like law enforcer means people who commit violent aggression on behalf of the state. And whether that's here, Israel, or anywhere else, that's horrendous. Anyway, this is sort of a rambling thing, and I don't even remember all the specifics that this dude from Palestinian dude brought up, because we had a fun discussion back and forth for a while. But it's so telling that how, like, he comes over to this country, people here, the vast majority of them just have no idea that that's going on. And they can imagine that, oh, somewhere in the Middle East, like Syria or Saudi Arabia, yeah, there's this primitive, nasty violence. But not Israel. They're our buddies. They're about democracy and freedom, and they're just defending themselves from evil terrorists, just like the BS that the U.S. ruling class spews. No, they're violently victimizing and murdering other people. And as it happens, the U.S. ruling class is doing the same thing, but they don't do it here. They do it in the Middle East. So the U.S. ruling class is murdering brown people over in the Middle East, and the Israeli ruling class is murdering brown people over in the Middle East, including brown people in Israel or over in Palestine, or arguing about the borders or anything else. But because Americans don't have to see it in their front yard day in and day, like they don't have to see brown people blown up in their front yard, they can say, well, that's not really happening. It's not real to me. It's somewhere on the other side of the world, and those people must be bad. They must be terrorists or something, because we're the good guys. We fight for truth and justice and yada, yada, yada. And no, we don't, and neither does the state of Israel. They're evil psychos, and they still violently harass people just for being Palestinian, not because they did something else. And what's sad is to watch this country go more and more in that direction, with the help of the Orange Führer, trying to push the idea that if you're from that nationality, or you say you're of this religion, or just you weren't born here, or you're the wrong color, we're going to initiate violence against you because we don't really trust you. Like, never mind whether you as an individual have done anything wrong or threatened anybody or anything like that. We're just going to be violent against you. And it occurred to me, I should have brought this up in the discussion. It occurred to me right after I drove away. That is a perfect example. Here's this guy, this young guy who's obviously very thoughtful. He's very observant. He's, going to college and learning all these things and learning about the world and philosophy and this and that and the other thing. He is exactly who the border fetish pseudo-libertarians are threatening violence against. No, I want a guy with a gun at the border pointing it in this guy's face because of what he looks like or because of where he was born. And here's this guy who's a voluntarist, the Palestinian voluntarist. And he would be on the receiving end of the violence condoned by people like Stefan Molyneux and a bunch of alt-right doofuses and even a bunch of anarchists or a bunch of people who pretend to be anarchists and talk about my borders. Those people over there, they don't really believe in freedom, so it's okay to initiate violence against all of them based on what we think some of them might do. And here's this guy that I met in real life. He's a real person. He's a real individual. He really believes in freedom. He happens to be Palestinian. And all those pretend anarchists who want borders would threaten violence against this guy, would have men with guns point him in that guy's face to say, you can't come here because you look like somebody who might vote Democrat. The ultimate irony being, not only does the guy believe in freedom way more than the vast majority of Americans, white Americans, already do, because the vast majority of Americans are statist, he believes in freedom more than the pretend anarchists who say they believe in borders believe in freedom. So the ultimate irony is the pretend anarchists saying, we have to protect our American freedom culture consisting of a bunch of statists, and we have to protect it by way of initiating violence, government violence, based on an imaginary border to keep out someone who actually believes in self-ownership and non-aggression and a stateless society. That's how weird the world has become. And that's how stupid fear makes people. But it was really cool to meet that guy and get a first-hand perspective. Well, first-hand for him, it's only second-hand for me, of what things are really like over there and what it's like to be somebody who all the way believes in peaceful coexistence and is routinely harassed by authoritarian psychos over there. And then he comes here, and I'm sure on the way in, he's routinely harassed by authoritarian psychos over here. But it's a fine demonstration of how most Americans have no idea what's going on in the rest of the world because what they get is by way of the TV in front of them, and that has nothing to do with reality. So I would say even a way more reliable and accurate way to know what's going on in the rest of the world, find somebody online to chat with who actually lives there. Not somebody here who, on behalf of the ruling class here, is giving you the message that the ruling class approves for you to hear about what's happening in some other side of the world, based on whether we're allies with based on whether the U.S. ruling class is allies with that ruling class or this ruling class or has set up that terrorist organization. It's just... So, but I love the fact that the internet enables us, because most of the time you're not going to happen to run into somebody at the supermarket, some complete stranger from the other side of the world who wants to talk to you. It only worked for me because he happened to recognize me from my videos, and then we had a cool talk. But find somebody who actually lives there. Of the people you think are so evil and scary, I dare you to go on Facebook. You don't have to go to the other side of the world. See if you can find somebody who's actually lived there and ask him what it's actually like. Ask him what the reality of the situation is. And of course, the person may be biased in one direction or another. They'll probably be a statist because most people are. But at least get a glimpse from somebody who's actually there who doesn't have an obvious agenda of lying to you to serve the interests of the people who claim the right to rule you. Get some eyewitness testimony from somebody who's there and lives through it. And you might see that, wow, so much of reality bears no resemblance to what you will ever hear in the mainstream U.S. media.